Good morning, everyone. I'm Bob Harper, currently serving as Interim Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs here at Fresno State, after having been the Dean of the Craig School of Business for a decade. On behalf of President Joseph Castro and our wonderful students, faculty, and staff, welcome to Fresno State to participate in this important event, Water and the Future of the San Joaquin Valley. I'd like to begin by recognizing State Senator Melissa Hurtado from the 14th Senate District. Senator Hurtado. We also have an impressive list of representatives from federal and state elected officials from up and down the valley that are too numerous to introduce everyone. So if you're a rep from an elected official, would you please stand and be recognized? Thank you all for being here. As we are all aware, water is a vital resource to the success of San Joaquin Valley, and Fresno State is committed to serving as the Valley's water university to assist in crafting and shaping the water policies and practices that will impact our region's agricultural economy, disadvantaged communities, urban centers, and environmental resources. The water system that we currently rely on in this state to transport water from Mount Shasta to San Diego, with delivery points in the rich agricultural lands of our valley, was initially conceived approximately 100 years ago. While the system has served us well to create the most productive agricultural region on the planet, as time has passed, the demands on the system has changed, the climate continues to change, and the competition for limited water supply resources continues to escalate. The status quo for water resource management in California is not sustainable, and we must adapt collectively or suffer the consequences. To adapt successfully and accommodate the changing demands and changing climate conditions, we must foster and embrace a new level of cooperation, collaboration, innovation, and creativity across all the many and varied stakeholder groups that live, work, learn, play, and grow food here in the San Joaquin Valley. I'm confident we can rise to the challenge, but we must do it together. Today's event is one of many that will be occurring in the coming months to foster this new level of cooperation, collaboration, innovation, and creativity. Fresno State is eager to invest our faculty, our staff, students, and research facilities to identify sustainable solutions for water resource management that will serve the needs of the Valley and our state for the next 100 years. Once again, on behalf of our President, Joseph Castro, and our students, faculty, staff, welcome to Fresno State to participate in this important event. We really appreciate your participation. To kick off, I'd like to now call Michael France, co-owner from Franz Hosel Nursery, to have the event continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Michael France, and I've had the privilege of serving on the advisory committee that helped work behind the scenes as a sounding board to help fact check and to weigh in on many of the comments and the thoughts being presented today. So to give you a little insight into what that means, I thought I would just take you on a little mental trip about just 2 blocks away to Sarge Green's very nice facility down the road where we met multiple times. And at each of these meetings, you'd have Ellen Hanak and her ace, bright staff sitting at the front of the room, many of which had accents. It seems like those people with accents always sound so smart. Even if they're not, you're convinced in your mind they're a lot smarter than you are. But around the table were a diverse group of stakeholders, whether that means academia, whether that means farmers, local government, NGOs with sincere and passionate interest for the environment, a whole breadth of interest groups there. And basically we said this: the facts are our water basin is oversubscribed. The facts are our weather continues to change. So we can either continue with the status quo and let the fate fall where it falls, or we can get ahead of it, analyze it, and try to do better. And so that was the goal, was to meet together as a group of people who have our own biases, Some of us feel that more water storage, whether above ground or below ground, is imperative to change the future. Others believe that reducing the amount of pumping and the amount of reliance on groundwater and surface water is equally imperative to change the arc of the future. And regardless of your own personal bias, we met in a way that would encourage collaboration, breaking down the silos of the traditional camps. And today I hope that you will see that the out product, the work product of that group is one of attempting to change the future in a more collaborative way. So with that, I'll welcome you again and turn it over to Ellen.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody here in the room and also who's following via webcast. I'm Ellen Hanak. I'm the director of the Public Policy Institute of California's Water Policy Center, and it's just really a pleasure to have the opportunity to kick this event off and have a chance to hear from a lot of great experts from around the region and around the state about next steps from this work that we've been that we just published and that we're happy to give birth to. It's been a project that started in 2016 with, as Michael said, some quality discussions over at the Center for Irrigation Technology, which is right near the farm grocery store, which has excellent ice cream and vegetables and things like that. So we'd often stop there on the way out. And it's been a project that has really been aiming to sort of look at the San Joaquin Valley, ground zero for addressing water scarcity, major agricultural region, the state's largest, and a region that faces a lot of other related challenges. And we thought it could be useful to bring folks together to look at what the key challenges are and what some of the promising solutions are. So it's been a really interesting project, and we think we've come up with some ideas that folks can run with. Actually, some folks are already running with some of these ideas, which is how we got the ideas from them. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of the findings. You have a short report, kind of the Reader's Digest version of the study on your table, but you also have opportunity to get the big, thick report in the back, in the entryway, and everything's online as well, including some appendices and things. The slides that I'm going to present are also going to be on our website for you to access if you'd like, and this whole event will be recorded so that the videos will be posted pretty soon. You'll get an email when those are up. At the end of the day, you'll also get an email requesting you to give us feedback on this event, to just tell us how we can improve. And I want to acknowledge that we've been benefited not only from a lot of input from folks as thought partners, but also from sponsors of the work. Numerous sponsors of the research are listed here, and your program lists the folks who helped make it possible to make this event happen, the event sponsors. So thank you to all of you who are in the room who helped with that. And if you see folks from those organizations, thank them, please. And what else? I think I have logistics to tell you, which are that restrooms are out toward the entryway. There's a hashtag for anybody who's tweeting. Hashtag SJV Water. So have at it if you feel like it. And so rundown of the day, I'm going to give you a quick overview, and then we're going to move over to panel discussions. We'll have 2 panels before lunch. Then folks will have a chance to grab lunch. Visit a little bit during that time, and about 30 minutes after we break for lunch, we're going to move on to the last panel. Please stay for that and enjoy. So now I'll get going on a little bit of an overview for you. This is the team that worked on this report. A lot of them are in the room here. We kind of aim to do an interdisciplinary approach to this, bringing in science and engineering and law and economics and policy. We're from a bunch of different organizations: Fresno State, UC Davis, UC Merced, Point Blue Conservation Science, and PPIC. And this is the short list of folks that were sitting over with us at the Center for Irrigation Technology at one or more meetings over the course of the last few years. and also folks who helped us to review the research. And so we really appreciate that. This is not, with many more people than this helped us, but we just wanted to acknowledge these folks who made the special effort to trek over, help us organize field trips, and all the like. We don't blame them for anything that you don't like in the report is not their fault. It's our fault, but anything that you like is probably a good idea we got from them. So you know, the big picture takeaway from this work is that the Valley is at a pivotal moment. You've heard that from Provost Harper. This is a region that faces really unprecedented challenges and inevitable change, and a lot is at stake for the economy, for public health, for the health of society and the environment. And what we find big picture-wise is that the most promising approaches are approaches that increase flexibility, that provide incentives for folks rather than command and control. It's more about finding ways to incentivize folks to make decisions that are beneficial. Oh, I forgot to mention, please silence your phone. Thank you. Thanks for that reminder. And that also all of these really promising approaches that we're going to be talking about cannot be done farm by farm or person by person. It's a sort of all hands on deck approach, but with cooperation and coordination, not only locally, but really we're suggesting valley-wide across the whole San Joaquin Valley region. And we also emphasize that this is fundamentally something that has to be, the leadership for this has to come from the Valley, at the local and regional level. State and federal governments can help a lot, but they shouldn't be in the driver's seat on this. This is something that folks in the Valley should be driving. So we already heard a little bit about the need to balance, bring groundwater supplies and demands into balance, and this was already a problem that folks were recognizing before the enactment of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in 2014. Since then, folks have been rolling up their sleeves to address this, but what this highlights for you is our estimates of what's been happening with groundwater balances over the whole region, and this is sort of a region-wide balance for the valley floor. We estimate that over the last 30 years, almost 2 million acre-feet a year on average have been overdrafted, or more pumping than is replenished. That's every time you see a red bar there, that's a year that the overall groundwater balance has gone down. There are some blue years, but not enough of them. Those tend to be in really wet years, and folks are going to have to be finding ways to, over the next 20 years, to make this, it'll still be variable with more pumping in dry years, but make it so that on average it's not going down over time. So this is just a map that shows where the Valley fits in the context of the state's overall approach to the groundwater management, the new groundwater management law. Anything that's in any of the basins that are in yellow or orange have to comply with this law and develop sustainability plans. The Valley is bright orange. Most of the Valley's basins are bright orange. That's because they're considered critically overdrafted by the state. The other main region that has to contend with bright orange and therefore a tighter deadline is on the Central Coast. But you can see that bright orange swath is really most of the Valley, and that means bringing basins into balance by 2040, finishing the plans, and it's starting working on implementing those plans by January of 2020 in these cases. And the math is simple. The solutions are not simple, but the math is simple. The math is either you add supplies and recharge more, or you use less water, or some combination. And what we find, just to give you sort of the punchline, is that it's got to be some kind of combination, because there's probably not enough options for increasing supplies to fill that entire amount of deficit at a price that farmers can afford. And it's fundamentally, cities and towns are going to have to be major players in this, but fundamentally this is something that's going to have to be driven by agriculture, because ag is the leading industry that's in terms of water use, and uses within this valley, about 90% of the total net water use is ag. So it's ag that knows already and is participating in this planning, but is going to have to really be thinking about that. The impacts are going to vary across the region. It's not every groundwater basin is in the same state. The southern part of the valley has more overdraft than the north. We're suggesting some ways to think about cooperation that might sort of spread that paint around a little bit, or spread the, share the water a little bit around, but that's something folks are going to have to think about. So the valley also faces some other related challenges with respect to water, air, and habitat quality. For farmers, managing nitrate and managing salt are big deals. Nitrate because it's a drinking water contaminant, and salt because it affects productivity of farmland. Poor air quality is an issue already in this valley, as you know, and there are concerns that if land is coming out of production as part of this equation to reduce water use, that depending on how it's managed, that could be a factor in contributing to more air quality problems. The dairy industry also has issues to deal with, not only with respect to air quality, but also now with methane. And this is also a region that has one of the biggest concentrations of endangered and threatened species in the nation. And that is not only in the rivers and wetlands, but it's also on dry lands in what's sort of that ecosystem called the San Joaquin Desert. And so that is a sort of underlying thing that folks are going to have to be managing in terms of potential conflicts over water and land, but also we're going to point to some potential opportunities for some multiple benefit approaches. So I'm going to take a sip of water and then just walk you through a little bit of some highlights of our findings in these three key areas, and then the panels are going to have a chance to really dig into some of the issues in each of these after I hand it over. The first is this big one of balancing water supplies and demand, sort of how to bring basins into balance over time. Second is looking at some of the groundwater quality challenges and promising approaches on that. And then the third is this idea of thinking about multiple benefit approaches for managing these water and land transitions. So there are a lot of different things approaches on the table for reducing groundwater overdraft. And this little pie chart just shows you the big picture shares of overdraft, delta imports, and local supplies in average net water uses over the last 30 years. So we're looking at getting rid of that red part there over time. So this just lists for you, there's a bunch of different supply management options ranging from capturing more of the high storm flows from these watersheds here, from the Sierra, local runoff, increasing local runoff by managing headwater forests in the Sierra to have more water come down into the valley, increasing delta imports. We call them imports because they're coming from up north. That's through various kinds of infrastructure projects like water fix and reservoirs up north. Reducing exports to other regions. That's the idea of convincing Southern California to take less of the delta imports and leaving more of it here. Reusing and repurposing local supplies, recycling, for example. And then various demand management options, including reducing net farm water use, reducing net urban use, reducing, even potentially water use on open space and wetlands. That's a bit harder to manage because those are, there's sort of, that's more nature doing its thing. Reducing losses from water infrastructure, sometimes folks consider, and then ways to increase flexibility. And so we look at in detail in the study everything that's highlighted in red here. Those are all areas where there's been analysis of different kinds, and so we pull all of that together and look at how much water potentially could be made available at what cost from these different approaches. So first I want to look, and I want to say we focus on looking at this from the perspective of agriculture and sort of assuming that we have to think about how ag can manage this and what's affordable for ag. We don't ignore cities. What we do with cities is we say, okay, we know that cities are there too, and they're going to have to participate in this effort. They have a small share of net water use right now, about 3% of the total over the last 30 years. There is population growth now and expected to continue. What we do is we show that cities could potentially, by saving about a bit more than a third of their outdoor water use, could potentially accommodate all that growth just through that conservation. We're not saying that's what they have to do, but it's just as a thought experiment, saying that that's a potential way for cities to manage. We're fully expecting cities and towns will partner with ag districts to work on supply projects as well. So this is a slide showing you sort of physically how much water might be available from these different approaches for agriculture. That's just how much might be out there if you did everything, forgetting about the cost. And you can see, the whole gray bar goes all the way out to if you could fill up with 1,800,000 acre feet a year, you would fill the balance. There are some options that are bigger than others. Capturing and storing more local runoff looks like the biggest potential reservoir. Increasing local runoff with headwater management looks pretty big too, as well as the delta imports. Now, adding in the cost element, how much looks like farmers would likely be able to afford it. And here we're looking at modeling that suggests that farmers probably don't want to pay more than $300 to $500 an acre foot for long-term water supplies. We're not talking about just a one-year drought kind of thing where they might pay more to keep their trees alive, but this is a long-term investment. What would they be willing to pay? Probably not more than $300 to $500 in general. What that shows you is that there are a lot of options that are not as viable economically, and in particular, the headwaters management. Right now, if you had to pay for it only for water supply, you would not want to do it because it would cost you probably a few $1,000s an acre foot. That's not to say it's not a good solution, but it's something where there has to be other funding for the other benefits of forest management to make that viable as also a water supply source. We're looking here only at the costs that we're including here contributions of, say, state and federal and other local players if they have already said there's money on the table that they're providing. So some of the other projects, like the big surface reservoir projects, we're showing are not viable now, but based on what most farmers would be willing to support. But if there were federal funding or state funding, that could change. So on balance, what we're finding is that new supplies can affordably fill about a quarter of the deficit, which is going to make a big difference economically. I'll show you that in a minute. But it also means that demand management is going to have to be part of the equation. So we'll be looking at, over time, about 3/4 of the deficit is going to have to be met through managing demand. It's not an overnight thing. This is over time. But what it means is agriculture will need to find ways to reduce its net water use. And that is probably not through irrigation efficiency, because irrigation efficiency has a lot of benefits, but it doesn't typically reduce the net amount of water that crops use. So what we're looking at mainly is crop shifting to crops that are less thirsty, but then mainly also land coming out of production. And so the key is, how do you do that in ways that are least harmful for the valley economy, recognizing that over the long term, managing groundwater is going to be good for the valley's economy. It's important for long-term sustainability of agriculture and a whole lot of other things, but in the short term, there will be some costs. So how to minimize those? And what we find is that flexibility is really key to managing farm water demand. So what I'm showing you here is a comparison of what would happen if farmers had no flexibility to make decisions on cropping once they have to reduce groundwater use. That's that dark bar there. That's inflexible water use. There would be, we estimate, about $3.5 billion a year of losses in crop revenues, and that's relative to about $20 billion a year baseline, so about 17%. That orange bar shows you what happens if there's flexibility for farmers within local basins to manage their groundwater and their surface water. So that means not only on their own farms, but also ability to trade with their neighbors and move that water to the fields that are most productive and most profitable. That reduces the costs by nearly half. It goes down to $2 billion in revenue losses. On the bottom, you see land fallowing. That wouldn't change very much. That's somewhere in the range of about 750,000 acres. Okay, now we're adding in additional flexibility with trading across basins just within the valley. So looking at the same amount of water, but just maybe folks in the northern part of the valley where there is more surface water available and less of a deficit, being willing to trade and provide some of their surface water for folks that are willing to pay them enough to make it worth their while down south. That's the orange bar. That further reduces the costs. That brings you down to nearly 2/3 lower than with inflexible water use. And it slightly reduces land fallowing because crop shifting would occur a little bit too. Okay, here's the portfolio where you're combining flexible water use on farms and those new supplies, adding in about 1/4 of the deficit with affordable new supply investments. That further reduces costs. You're down to only 25% of the revenue losses that you would have had with inflexible water use and no new supplies. And that also gives you a big bonus on the land fallowing. It brings you down from 750 to about 530,000 acres that would have to come out of production. So trading in new supplies it looks like the best economic option. There is going to need to be ways to think about doing that so that it's protective of folks at the local level in order to make sure that there aren't undesirable impacts, but it looks like a good way to think about looking ahead. And now this just shows you, I was just looking at crops there, this shows you what happens. We also look downstream because crops are inputs into the dairy sector, into the beef sector, and into food and beverage processing in this region. So the dairy and beef is the orange, the crops are the green, the dairy and beef is the orange, and the yellow is the processing. And here I'm just comparing the three scenarios of sort of a flexible local water use, that's the first one, then valley-wide surface water trading, and then the third, the lowest bar, that's the combo, the portfolio approach. Portfolio approach compared to the flexible local water use, 40% lower GDP losses, 40% fewer job losses than that flexible approach. And you can imagine inflexible local water use would be even higher costs. So this really is important. And then the other aspect of flexibility is what folks are calling a glide path, which is not implementing what I call cold turkey sigma. So not saying plans are due on January 31st, 2020, February 1st, all overdraft ends. Having easing into that because that gives folks time to plan, figure out what works, and make investment decisions that are smart. Now, doing that is going to also mean having to think about mitigating undesirable impacts of continuing overdraft. I'll just note that, and that's something that we talk about in terms of the importance of GSAs, Groundwater Sustainability Agency. He's thinking about that. So we have detailed lists of the priorities for action. I'm just going to list them off here. Assessing infrastructure needs is going to be really important. Modernizing operations of groundwater and surface water storage and conveyance. Incentivizing recharge on farmland, a lot of potential there. Developing local water trading rules, a healthy trading culture at the local level. Clarifying, this is a big one for the state, how much water is available for recharge. Facilitating approvals for trading and banking. There's some local work to do there, but this is especially state and federal approval processes. And then everybody needs to think about coordinating to maximize benefits. This is not something that can be done at the level of a farm or even an individual GSA in many cases, because a lot of GSAs are too small to do this well. So now a little bit on groundwater quality. This is an area where there's been a lot of new programs introduced over the last decade, a lot of new attention to this. Just say that SGMA requires folks to think about water quality alongside water quantity, but there are other programs besides SGMA that are also ongoing, and this is a meeting of a big effort that's been happening over the last decade or so. CV Salts. We're going to have a chance to hear from David Corey, who's one of the leaders of that effort in the second panel. We focus on a few key issues in terms of water quality management, groundwater quality management. One is providing safe drinking water. And the second is managing long-term loading of nitrogen into the soils and groundwater, and then managing salt balance. And we also look at the need to think about explicitly the synergies and potential trade-offs between water quality and quantity management, which is especially important for thinking about recharge. So this is the urgent issue. This is, the valley is a hotspot for SGMA. It's also a hotspot for safe drinking water in California. This shows you two different dimensions of it. One of them is the map A on the left is the community water systems, so little utilities, often very small, that are out of compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act because of one or more contaminants. There, at the time when we took this snapshot back last summer, the valley had over half of them. 10% of the population, over half of the systems out of compliance. And then the map B shows you during the last drought, both the households on small, like domestic wells and very small systems who reported running out of water, and then the orange shows you small water systems that had to apply for emergency help. And you can again see that the valley is a hot spot there. Almost 80% of the reported household shortages are in the valley, and then about half of the small systems also in the valley. So this is a manageable problem in the sense that smart minds and resources can solve this, and there's fortunately a lot more attention to this now than there has been, but we're not there yet in terms of solving it. This is just to give you a little heads up on kind of the long-term nitrogen loading issue, and that it's a challenge for ag in general, because anytime you're using fertilizer, you're contributing some additional nitrogen to the groundwater and soils. For dairies, this is a special challenge because one of the side products or byproducts of producing milk is producing manure, and the dairies are able to use that as fertilizer on their corn silage, but they have too much of it. And it's also harder to manage in a precise way than chemical fertilizers. So what this map shows you is dairies and then also hotspots for nitrogen loading. And dairies have about 6% of the land in the San Joaquin Valley, and they have almost 90% of the real hotspot areas for nitrogen loading. The solutions for this, we're going to get to hear from Anya in the second panel, but it's both about better management on the farms, but also finding ways to get some of this manure off the farms and convert it into products like fertilizers that other folks can use. Salinity is another challenge. This is red, hot red is high salt. There are already 250,000 acres that have been taken out of production in the valley because of salinity. It is a big issue for ag yields. Most of the higher value crops don't like it. So farmers manage it by managing crops, managing the sort of agronomy and so on. There are some big proposals for infrastructure to deal with it. They're expensive. So this is going to be an area where technological improvements are going to be really key over time. But also thinking about, as lands might be compromised from a salinity perspective, coordinating those decisions with lands that might need to come out to save water, to bring groundwater basins into balance, would be a smart thing, because that's probably a good way to reduce the economic costs. And then this crop wheel shows you potential and some of the issues to think about with groundwater recharge on farmland. The good news is that there's a lot of land that's very suitable for recharge in this valley, in terms of the soils being permeable and so on. And a lot of places also there's room in the ground to put that water. But on farmland, it matters. You have to think about the water quality issues. In particular, are you going to be sending nitrate down into the drinking water table? So what we looked at was 2014 crops on the suitable lands, and the dark blue, those are crops that are clean crops in the sense of either not requiring nitrogen or requiring very little. The orange are not good places to do it. And that whole half of that area, that green, those are crops that use nitrogen fertilizer. We got to think about how you manage it if you're going to be doing a lot of recharge. And there's a lot of creative thinking about that. This is an area of further work. So I'm not going to go through the priorities here because I kind of gave you some ideas about it. And I think that the panel will be able to provide you with some insights. So I just want to get to the last area, which is thinking a bit about beneficial water and land use transitions. And we talk about this at some length in the report, and the idea is thinking about, are there ways to get multiple benefits as water becomes more scarce, more land becomes available. There are some bad things that could happen if retired land is not managed well, but there's also potential to get multiple benefits, and that includes healthy soils, which can get credits for carbon capture, habitat improvements, solar energy, recharge lands that can also get you some wildlife benefits, flood protection, recreation, a lot of things that working together can enable you to pool different funding sources and get some revenues to farmers and landowners to help to manage these things. We do some estimates of kind of what current planning processes are looking at for lands that might come out of production, and what we find is that they don't come close relative to the amount that we're estimating might need to come out of production. So that whole yellow part is kind of other idled lands. The parts and colors are sort of areas where there are things for which there are some plans for thinking about restoration or solar. So what we're saying is the goal should be to steward all idled lands, and that there are actually a lot of potential promising ways to do that. We look at planning options. This is going to be discussed in the third panel. What we say is that it makes really a lot of sense to think about this not just at the local level, but at the regional level, especially for things like lands that might be suitable for habitat corridors and such. And this is just one vision of how ecologists think about that. It shows you that ideally you'd want to look at lands not just in the south, but across the whole valley. Just to give you an idea, the amount of farmland that shows up on that map is about the same amount that we think would need to come out of production over time as part of Sigma basin balancing. Flexible regulatory approaches, this is a theme throughout the report on a whole lot of things, but it's very important for thinking about managing these lands in a smart way. Because we have tools, regulatory tools to do that, but they're too hard right now. And I'm showing you here a picture of the Kern Water Bank, which has a habitat conservation plan and a natural communities conservation plan, also conservation banking. They did that in order to have flexibility to manage some lands for recharge, but they got that permit in order to manage uplands. And it's turned out to be a great way to recharge water, as well as a lot of benefits as an intermittent wetland area in addition to the upland habitat that they provide. Making that easier so it doesn't take you 10 years to do it would be really good. And this is where having broader approaches so farmers don't have to do this individually could really be beneficial. There are some other ideas. Ashley Boren is here from Sustainable Conservation. They're working on streamlining permitting by simplifying so that all the different agencies sign on to the same process so that you don't have to go around and get 12 different sign-offs. They're doing that now for aquatic ecosystems. This is something we're suggesting that they should next jump on to looking at that for upland habitat too. Priorities for action in this area also include funding and incentives. There are a lot of different funding sources already available. They're just not being used for this right now, but they could. And farmers will need incentives at the local level too in terms of what happens to their water. A lot of them are going to want the water credits, or at least part of the water that's attached to that land, to be able to use on other lands. This is a picture of Atwell Island, which was some salinity impacted land that was retired with using some money from the Central Valley Project and being really a useful sort of study area for how you can restore desert ecosystem. This is just an idea to show that actually using formerly irrigated lands for some of this restoration is a great thing, because you've got irrigation systems in place already a lot of times, and there's a lot of potential to use the know-how of large-scale agriculture to find cost-effective ways to do this. For example, farmers can grow native seeds at a lot cheaper cost than little NGOs can do. So technical support is going to be a final thing that's going to be really important, and this is where NGOs can be important, extension, but also an entity that isn't very active in the valley, but that really we think should be, resource conservation districts. What this map shows you is how much money resource conservation districts have spent in 2016, and the gray areas actually show you where there are no RCDs. The valley needs these to manage this transition, and right now they actually don't have RCDs in every place that they need them, and they need to get more funding. And this is totally something where the state could provide some help. We also think USDA could be a really important partner in a lot of this. So I'll just close by saying that there are a lot of opportunities. So we're optimistic because of the conversations that we've been having with folks around the valley. We think that the state and the federal agencies can play an effective role, but that's not going to happen unless there's really unless you all ask for it in a concerted way. So, thank you. Okay, so now we move on to the really interesting conversations. I'm going to invite our first panel up. My colleague Alvar Escriva-Bau, who is a research fellow at PPIC, and who pretty much all the numbers that I showed you on water supply and demand were done by him together with our colleague Josue Medina-Azuara from UC Merced. And Alvar will introduce his panelists, who are an amazing lineup as well. So come on up, everybody.